The skyline of New York was a glittering tapestry of steel and glass, reaching towards the heavens as the city pulsed with life below. Inside the walls of Lynch and Ashcroft Technologies, however, the world seemed to operate at a far different pace. The constant hum of activity, the rushing of employees from one meeting to the next, the crunching of numbers and formulation of strategies, everything moved in a tight, controlled rhythm. But none of that mattered to Evelyn Cortez at that moment. She was far removed from it all. Evelyn had always been a woman of iron will. The CEO of one of the most innovative tech companies in the city, she had built her career from nothing, sacrificing personal desires and relationships along the way. In a world where power and influence were everything, Evelyn had made herself a fortress. She didn't have time for distractions. She didn't have time for love, for softness, for anything that could make her vulnerable. The ambition that drove her forward also kept her at arm's length from everyone, colleagues, friends, even family. That evening, she had just come out of a grueling board meeting that had left her mentally drained. The investors had pushed her to the edge, their incessant demands wearing her down. Yet, her mind refused to quiet. As much as she longed for a break, she knew the stakes were too high. Her company's future depended on every decision she made. There was always something to be done, a new task to tackle, another report to review. The office lights flickered as the building emptied, the soft echo of footsteps along the corridors fading as employees headed home. The once bustling floors now felt eerily silent. Evelyn wandered aimlessly, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors, her mind still racing with thoughts of the day's meeting. Her hands were tucked into the pockets of her tailored suit, her jaw tight with frustration. Without really thinking about it, she found herself walking down a corridor she didn't often use, one of the quieter hallways. It was dimly lit, and the walls were adorned with abstract pieces of art that she had never paid much attention to. She paused for a moment in front of a small lounge area, glancing at the leather chairs and soft lighting. Something about the quiet atmosphere felt calming in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. But just as she was about to turn back, a faint sound caught her attention. It was delicate, almost ethereal, like the faintest hum, soft and melodic. She frowned, trying to identify the source. The sound was coming from one of the restroom doors, which was slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, Evelyn approached the door quietly, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. She hesitated, unsure if she should intrude, but the sound was so inviting, so unexpectedly soothing, that she found herself pushing the door open ever so slightly. What she saw took her completely by surprise. Inside, Amelia Quinn, the company's newest junior designer, was standing in front of a mirror. Amelia was humming softly to herself, brushing her long, dark hair, her movements fluid and graceful. She didn't notice Evelyn standing in the doorway, completely absorbed in her task. It was almost as though the world outside had ceased to exist for Amelia. Evelyn couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something captivating about the way Amelia carried herself, something entirely different from the cutthroat atmosphere of the office. Amelia's presence seemed to exude a kind of peace, a quiet confidence that Evelyn had never encountered in her world. The soft, melodic hum she was creating filled the room with a strange, calming energy that felt like a balm to Evelyn's overworked mind. For a moment, Evelyn just stood there, frozen. The stillness of the moment felt like an anomaly in her fast-paced, relentless life. She felt an odd sense of vulnerability creeping up inside her, something she wasn't used to feeling. Her breath caught in her throat. She realized that she had no business being there, no reason to linger in the doorway, watching someone who wasn't even aware of her presence. She wasn't the type of person to give in to these kinds of impulses, and yet something inside her urged her to stay. Suddenly, her heels slipped on the polished floor as she tried to step back. Her body lurched forward, and before she could catch herself, she stumbled into the restroom, causing the door to swing open wide. Amelia turned at the sound of the door crashing open, her eyes wide in surprise. Evelyn instinctively stepped back, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," Evelyn exclaimed quickly, raising her hands in a futile attempt to apologize. "I didn't mean to intrude. I heard the music, and I didn't think anyone would be in here." Amelia, clearly flustered, set her brush down and gave a nervous laugh. "It's okay," she said softly, still blinking in surprise. "I didn't expect anyone to walk in." There was an awkward silence between them as the two women stood there, staring at each other. Evelyn could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, and her instinct was to leave immediately, to retreat into her cold, solitary world. But there was something about Amelia, something in the way she looked at Evelyn with such openness and warmth, that kept her rooted to the spot. Amelia's gaze softened, and her expression shifted from one of surprise to something gentler. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Evelyn cleared her throat, her heart suddenly pounding in her chest. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just a little distracted, I suppose." Amelia didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press further. Instead, she gave a small, understanding smile. "It's been a long day, hasn't it?" she said quietly, her voice warm and easy. Evelyn didn't respond immediately. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to her with such genuine kindness. In the world of high-stakes meetings and corporate strategies, people didn't ask how you were doing. They didn't care to know. After a long pause, Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes. Very long." Amelia hesitated before speaking again. "If you ever need a break, or just want to talk, I'm usually around. I don't mind listening." Evelyn felt a strange knot form in her chest. It wasn't like her to let her guard down, especially not to someone she barely knew. She wasn't someone who relied on others, certainly not someone like Amelia, who had only recently joined the company. And yet, there was something in the sincerity of Amelia's voice that made Evelyn pause. "Thank you," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "I'll keep that in mind." Without another word, Evelyn turned and left the restroom, her mind racing with thoughts she didn't want to entertain. She wasn't sure why the encounter had affected her so deeply. It wasn't as if she'd never spoken to someone before, never encountered someone with warmth and kindness. But there was something about Amelia's unguarded nature that seemed to cut through all the armor Evelyn had carefully built around herself. As she walked down the corridor back to her office, Evelyn found herself wondering why she couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the look in Amelia's eyes, the soft hum that had filled the room, the way Amelia's presence seemed to pull her in, despite her attempts to keep her distance. But there was no room for distractions. Evelyn was the CEO, the leader of a powerful company, and she couldn't afford to lose focus. The world she had built for herself was one of order and control, a world where emotions had no place. Yet, deep down, Evelyn knew that something had shifted inside her. She couldn't put a name to it yet, but she could feel it, a small crack in the walls she had spent years constructing. And it was that crack, that brief, inexplicable moment with Amelia, that would slowly begin to change everything. The days that followed the awkward yet strangely meaningful encounter in the restroom seemed to pass in a blur for Evelyn. Despite her best efforts to bury the memory of the brief moment with Amelia Quinn, it lingered in her thoughts like a shadow. The sound of Amelia's hum, the soft warmth in her smile, the unspoken understanding that had passed between them, it all clung to Evelyn's mind in a way that unsettled her. Evelyn wasn't someone who allowed herself to be easily distracted. As the CEO of Lynch and Ashcroft Technologies, she had spent years cultivating a persona that was sharp, calculated, and distant. She had no time for emotional indulgence or fleeting connections. Everything in her life had a purpose, and that purpose was the success of her company. It was easy, after all, to focus on work when everything else seemed so complicated. But Amelia, there was something about her. It wasn't just her striking features, or the way she carried herself with quiet grace, it was the way she seemed to exist in a world that wasn't driven by the same cold logic that governed Evelyn's life. Amelia had an air of warmth, a softness that Evelyn couldn't quite ignore. And for reasons she couldn't fully understand, Evelyn felt drawn to her. Over the next few days, they crossed paths in the office several times, though their interactions were brief and always tinged with an underlying awkwardness. Amelia would offer a friendly smile, and Evelyn would nod politely, her gaze quickly moving away as if to escape the unfamiliar sensation that seemed to blossom every time their eyes met. Evelyn, ever the professional, tried her best to maintain her composure. She buried herself in her work, diving deeper into the reports, presentations, and meetings that demanded her attention. She couldn't afford to let anything, or anyone, distract her. However, despite her best efforts, the pull towards Amelia only seemed to grow stronger. It was subtle at first. Amelia's desk, located in a corner of the open-plan office, was often where Evelyn would pass on her way to meetings or when grabbing a quick coffee. And though their conversations remained brief, they began to feel more natural, more easy, as though there was an unspoken familiarity between them. Amelia was always warm, always friendly, and somehow, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that there was a part of her that longed for more, something beyond the sterile walls of the office, something deeper. One afternoon, just after a particularly taxing meeting with investors, Evelyn found herself at the coffee machine in the break room. She was exhausted, mentally drained by the demands of the day. As she waited for her coffee to brew, she couldn't help but notice that Amelia was sitting at one of the tables, her eyes focused on her laptop screen, scribbling something in her notebook. The hum of the office around them felt muted, like a distant echo, and for a brief moment, the weight of Evelyn's responsibilities seemed to lift. Amelia looked up as she caught Evelyn's gaze, and a soft smile spread across her face. "You look like you could use a break," she said with a hint of playfulness in her voice. Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tapping absently against the edge of her coffee cup. She had planned to return to her office immediately, to dive back into the mountain of work that awaited her. But for some reason, the prospect of staying in the break room, of talking to someone who seemed to understand the weight of the world without adding to it, felt oddly appealing. "I could," Evelyn admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "It's been a long day." Amelia's eyes softened, and she pushed her laptop aside. "I know how that feels. Want to sit for a bit? Just take a breath, you know." It wasn't the sort of invitation Evelyn usually accepted. She was the CEO, she didn't need to sit around, idly chatting. But there was something in Amelia's voice, something unguarded and open, that made Evelyn pause. She found herself nodding, before she could talk herself out of it. "Sure," Evelyn said, her voice a little more relaxed than before. She took a seat across from Amelia, setting her coffee down in front of her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It was the kind of silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but rather, peaceful. Evelyn found herself breathing a little easier, as if the tension she had been carrying for so long had finally begun to dissipate. Amelia broke the silence first. "I was just working on a new design proposal for the company's headquarters," she said, tapping her notebook thoughtfully. "But I keep getting stuck. It's frustrating." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What's the challenge?" Amelia shrugged, her fingers idly tracing the edges of her notebook. "I think I'm just overthinking it. Trying to make it perfect instead of letting it come naturally." Evelyn leaned forward slightly, intrigued. "Perfectionism can be a curse," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "I know the feeling all too well." Amelia smiled, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "Yeah, I guess we all have our own version of it, huh?" For a brief moment, Evelyn forgot she was speaking to a colleague. She forgot that they were separated by roles, by positions within the company. In that moment, they were just two people, talking like old friends. And Evelyn realized that, for the first time in a long while, she wasn't trying to manage a conversation or maintain control of the narrative. She was just, listening. And it felt nice. "You know," Evelyn said after a long pause, "I've spent most of my life trying to control everything. I thought if I could just get everything perfect, if I could just make all the right moves, I wouldn't have to deal with the uncertainty, the chaos." She leaned back in her chair, her gaze wandering toward the window, where the city skyline stretched out before her. But life doesn't work that way, does it? Amelia was silent for a moment, her gaze soft as she watched Evelyn. No, she said gently, it doesn't. Evelyn looked back at her, feeling a strange sense of vulnerability rise within her. She had never spoken so openly with anyone at work, especially not with someone so much younger. Amelia, in her simple honesty, had a way of pulling truths from Evelyn that she had long buried. I guess, Evelyn continued, almost in a whisper, I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to let go. Amelia's voice was soft but assured. Maybe you don't have to stop. Maybe you just need to allow yourself to be a little less perfect. To be okay with things not always going as planned. Evelyn's chest tightened at the thought. It was a concept she had never allowed herself to entertain. But as she sat there, staring into Amelia's calm, steady gaze, she felt something inside her begin to shift. Maybe it was time to let go of some of the control. Maybe it was time to let herself feel. The quiet of the break room enveloped them, and Evelyn realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't just focused on the next task or the next deadline. She was here, in this moment, with someone who didn't demand anything from her. And, for reasons she couldn't explain, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Amelia broke the silence again, her voice light but warm. You know, we don't always have to have all the answers right away. Sometimes, it's okay to just let things unfold. Evelyn felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips, an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest. Maybe you're right, she said, surprised by how easy the words came. The rest of the conversation passed by in a blur, a mix of casual chatter and quiet moments of reflection. And as Evelyn left the break room to return to her office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. It wasn't just the words Amelia had shared, though they had resonated deeply with her. It was the presence of Amelia herself, the way she had been so open, so disarmingly kind. Evelyn didn't know what it was, but something about that conversation had shifted the air between them. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew that she had just shared a moment with someone who had the power to change her life in ways she wasn't yet ready to understand. As she walked down the hallway, her thoughts were filled with the lingering echo of Amelia's words. Maybe perfection wasn't the answer. Maybe, for once, she could allow herself to step off the path she had walked for so long and let herself experience something different. Something real. And that thought, that tiny seed of possibility, stayed with her long after the workday ended. The days after their conversation in the break room felt strangely different to Evelyn. Despite the continued pressure of her role as CEO and the countless tasks that demanded her attention, something inside her had shifted. The weight of the world she had carried for so long seemed just a little lighter, and the usual monotony of the office environment felt a little less oppressive. It was as if Amelia's words had opened a small crack in the armor Evelyn had spent years perfecting. Though they didn't speak much during work hours, Evelyn found herself looking for Amelia more often, watching her from the corner of her eye as she moved through the office, her laughter soft and genuine as she spoke with colleagues. Amelia had a way of making the office feel more human, more alive. It was a stark contrast to Evelyn's own methodical, almost mechanical approach to her job. She had never allowed herself to be swept up in the social currents of the workplace. She had always kept her distance, always too focused on business to indulge in idle conversation or small talk. But now, she found herself wondering what it would be like to experience the office through Amelia's eyes, through her warmth, her openness, her ability to connect with others. One late evening, as the office began to empty out, Evelyn found herself walking past Amelia's desk. The building was quieter now, the usual hum of activity replaced by the soft sounds of typing and the occasional click of a mouse. It was one of those rare moments when the office felt almost like a sanctuary, a place for reflection instead of constant action. Evelyn stopped in front of Amelia's desk, unsure of what had brought her there. Amelia was bent over her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked on a new design for the company's latest project. "You're still here?" Evelyn asked, her voice softer than she intended. It had been a long day, and the weariness in her tone was evident. Amelia looked up, her expression lighting up with a gentle smile. "Yeah, just trying to finish up this design," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm despite the late hour. "I wanted to get it right. You know how it is, always tweaking until it feels perfect." Evelyn nodded, leaning against the edge of the desk. There was something about Amelia's dedication, the way she poured herself into her work, that reminded Evelyn of the woman she used to be, before ambition and power had consumed every aspect of her life. "You're really passionate about this," Evelyn observed. "It's refreshing." Amelia's smile widened, and she set aside her laptop for a moment, giving Evelyn her full attention. "I love what I do. I think it's important to find something you're passionate about, something that makes you feel like you're contributing to something bigger than yourself." Evelyn looked down at the desk, her fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the surface. For a brief moment, she let herself entertain the thought that maybe she had once been like Amelia, passionate, driven by a sense of purpose that wasn't always about success, but about fulfillment. But somewhere along the way, she had lost that. She had buried it beneath layers of corporate strategy and the relentless pursuit of achievement. She had told herself that passion and emotion were luxuries she couldn't afford. "Do you ever get tired?" Evelyn asked suddenly, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Tired of trying to be perfect, trying to get everything right all the time?" Amelia's expression softened. She reached for her cup of coffee and took a sip, her eyes never leaving Evelyn. "All the time," she admitted quietly. "But I think that's part of the process, you know. We all have our moments of doubt, of feeling like we're not doing enough, or that we're not measuring up. But that's okay. We're all human. The trick is to keep going, even when it feels impossible." Evelyn's gaze shifted from Amelia's face to the empty office around them. She felt a strange stirring in her chest, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Vulnerability. It was a feeling she had long suppressed, hidden behind the walls of her success. But Amelia's words were like a key, unlocking something inside her she hadn't realized was still there. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet stretched out between them, comfortable and unhurried. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evelyn allowed herself to just be. There was no need to be the CEO, no need to wear the mask of control and authority. She could simply be herself, in this moment, with someone who didn't expect anything from her. "You're right," Evelyn finally said, her voice almost a whisper. "I've spent so much time focusing on the future, on what's next, that I've forgotten to live in the moment. I've forgotten to feel." Amelia's gaze softened, and she reached out, resting a hand gently on Evelyn's. "It's never too late to start," she said quietly, her voice warm with understanding. "You can still find joy in what you do, Evelyn. It doesn't have to be all about perfection." Evelyn looked at Amelia, her heart racing in a way she hadn't expected. There was something in the way Amelia looked at her, so open, so unguarded, that made her feel like she was seeing the world in a new light. It wasn't just about work. It wasn't just about achieving goals or climbing the corporate ladder. There was something more, something deeper, something she had been too afraid to face. But Amelia, with her quiet strength and unwavering belief in the goodness of people, made Evelyn want to believe again. She wanted to believe in something beyond her own ambition, beyond her self-imposed isolation. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. The evening stretched on, the city outside growing darker as the hours passed. Amelia continued to work, her focus unwavering, but there was a new softness in the air between them, a subtle understanding that went beyond words. Evelyn didn't know where this connection was leading, or what it meant for her future, but in that moment, she knew one thing for sure: it was something she wasn't ready to walk away from. As the night wore on, Evelyn found herself lingering longer than she had planned, her thoughts no longer consumed by the demands of her job, but by something else entirely. Amelia's presence had become a quiet anchor, a grounding force that was both gentle and powerful in its own right. When Evelyn finally stood to leave, she turned back to Amelia, her heart unexpectedly full. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "For listening. For reminding me that there's more to life than just work." Amelia's eyes met hers, and she smiled warmly. "Anytime, Evelyn. Anytime." As Evelyn walked back to her office, she realized that something had changed. She didn't know exactly what it was yet, but she felt a shift deep within her. She wasn't sure where this connection with Amelia was leading, but she knew one thing: she wasn't afraid to find out. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt the weight of her responsibilities lift, if only for a moment, and the promise of something new, something meaningful, began to take root in her heart. It was a feeling that both frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. But no matter where it led, she knew she couldn't go back to the life she had lived before, one that was solely defined by achievement, by control, and by the constant chase for perfection. Amelia had shown her that there was more to life, and Evelyn wasn't ready to let go of that just yet. And as the office grew quieter and the city lights twinkled outside, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something far more important than anything she had ever worked for. The days following their conversation seemed to pass in a haze for Evelyn. She found herself struggling to focus on the tasks at hand, her thoughts constantly drifting back to the moments spent with Amelia Quinn. The quiet, unspoken understanding that had developed between them over the past few weeks seemed to hang in the air like an invisible thread, drawing Evelyn closer to a world she had spent years avoiding, a world filled with vulnerability, warmth, and emotions she had long suppressed. Despite her best efforts to maintain her distance, Evelyn couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Amelia. It wasn't just the softness in Amelia's voice, or the way she smiled when their eyes met, it was something deeper, something she couldn't quite place. Evelyn had always prided herself on being in control, on keeping her emotions tightly locked away behind the fortress of her career. But with Amelia, everything felt different. The walls she had so carefully constructed were beginning to crack, piece by piece, and she found herself facing a part of herself she had long forgotten. The office, once a familiar and controlled environment, had started to feel more alive, more human. The cold efficiency that had always defined the company seemed to fade when Amelia was around. Her presence, her warmth, brought a lightness to the space that Evelyn hadn't realized was missing. And yet, there was a nagging voice in the back of her mind telling her that this connection, this attraction, was a dangerous distraction. She had worked too hard to get where she was. She couldn't afford to let anything, especially something as unpredictable as love, derail her carefully planned life. But every time she saw Amelia, every time they exchanged a look or shared a quiet moment, Evelyn's resolve weakened. It was as though Amelia had unlocked something inside her that she didn't know existed. She found herself craving more of those quiet exchanges, more of the moments where she didn't have to be the CEO, where she could simply be Evelyn, vulnerable, uncertain, and alive in a way she hadn't been in years. One evening, as Evelyn sat in her office, her mind buzzing with numbers and projections, she heard a soft knock on the door. She looked up to see Amelia standing in the doorway, her expression hesitant but kind. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Amelia asked, her voice gentle. Evelyn felt a wave of warmth wash over her, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. She nodded, gesturing for Amelia to enter. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Amelia stepped inside, her eyes flicking nervously around the room before meeting Evelyn's gaze. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet but filled with a certain determination. "About everything, about us." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of surprise and anticipation flooding her chest. She had known that they were both dancing around something, something unspoken, but hearing Amelia bring it up so directly made Evelyn's pulse race. "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, her voice a little more strained than she intended. She was trying to keep her composure, trying to maintain the distance she had always kept, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. Amelia took a deep breath before continuing. "I can't keep pretending that this is just some professional thing. What's been happening between us, these moments we share, they're not just casual. At least, not for me." Evelyn swallowed hard, her mind racing. She knew exactly what Amelia was saying, but she wasn't sure how to respond. She had spent so many years compartmentalizing her emotions, distancing herself from any potential complications, that the thought of stepping into something so raw and uncertain felt terrifying. Amelia, Evelyn started, her voice faltering. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. She couldn't deny the truth in what Amelia was saying, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to admit it out loud. Admitting it would mean shattering the walls she had worked so hard to build. Amelia, sensing Evelyn's hesitation, took a step closer, her eyes soft and understanding. "I'm not asking for anything, Evelyn. I'm not asking for you to change or to throw your whole life away. I need you to know how I feel. I can't keep pretending like I don't care, like this isn't something real." The words hung in the air between them, thick with the weight of unspoken emotions. Evelyn's heart was pounding in her chest now, and she could feel the walls inside her crumbling, piece by piece. She had always prided herself on being in control, on knowing exactly what to do, what to say, but now, in this moment, she felt completely adrift. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to respond. But Amelia's presence, her honesty, her unwavering vulnerability, made something inside Evelyn stir. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn allowed herself to feel the full weight of what was happening between them. She felt a longing, a desire to lean into something real, something that wasn't defined by spreadsheets or meetings or endless ambition. She wanted to embrace the uncertainty, to allow herself to be swept away by the connection they shared. But fear held her back. "I don't know what to do with this," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of her own hesitation. Amelia stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You don't have to know everything right now. Just let yourself feel it. Let yourself be open to it." Evelyn's heart ached with the intensity of the moment. She had spent so many years burying her emotions, keeping herself buried beneath the weight of her career and her own fears. But now, in the presence of someone who seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had, she felt herself faltering. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take a leap, into the unknown, into something that didn't come with a roadmap or a guarantee. "I've never been good at this," Evelyn admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I've always been focused on the next thing, the next challenge, the next victory. I've never allowed myself to just feel." Amelia's expression softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against Evelyn's. "You don't have to have all the answers, Evelyn. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time." Evelyn looked at Amelia, her heart pounding in her chest. The air between them seemed to crackle with an intensity that took her breath away. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know what kind of future they might have together, but for the first time in ages, Evelyn felt the stirrings of something that wasn't about control or ambition. It was about connection. About opening herself up to something more than the world she had built for herself. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. "I'm scared," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely a breath. "But I want to try. I want to see where this goes." Amelia smiled softly, her eyes shining with something close to relief. "We don't have to rush, Evelyn. We can take it slow. One step at a time." In that moment, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. The walls that had kept her safe, kept her distant from others, had cracked wide open. She didn't know what the future held, whether this connection with Amelia would lead to something lasting or whether it would eventually fade away, but she knew one thing, she was no longer afraid to find out. As the evening wore on and the office grew quieter, Evelyn stood there, her heart open and vulnerable, ready to embrace whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't focused on control or perfection. She was focused on what was right in front of her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was truly living. The weeks that followed Evelyn's quiet admission to herself were both exhilarating and terrifying. It was as if a door had been opened that she had long forgotten was even there, a door leading to emotions and experiences she had shut out for years. With every moment she spent around Amelia, the more the walls she had so carefully constructed seemed to crumble. But while Evelyn's heart pulled her toward Amelia in ways she could no longer deny, her mind was constantly at war with itself. There was so much at stake. She had worked so hard to get to where she was, CEO of Lynch and Ashcroft Technologies, a company she had built from the ground up, a company that was her legacy. Evelyn had always prided herself on her ability to control every aspect of her life. She was a planner, a strategist. She did not let emotions cloud her judgment, especially not when it came to business. Yet, with Amelia, things felt different. Every time they shared a glance or a conversation, it was as if the rules of the world she had created no longer applied. She found herself caught between two worlds, the professional, controlled version of herself that had no room for anything personal, and the raw, vulnerable woman who was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have it all. It was a cold Friday evening when things started to unravel. Evelyn had stayed later than usual at the office, her thoughts tangled in both the future of her company and her burgeoning feelings for Amelia. The tension in her chest had been growing for weeks now, and she could no longer ignore it. She knew she needed to talk to Amelia. She couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when her heart was constantly in conflict. After finishing her final meeting of the day, Evelyn walked out of the conference room, her mind still whirling. She needed air, a moment to herself to clear her head. She grabbed her coat and walked toward the elevators, but as she passed through the open office space, she saw Amelia sitting at her desk, still working on a project despite the late hour. Amelia's focus was unwavering, her head bent over her laptop, the soft glow of the screen lighting her features in a way that made Evelyn's heart ache. She stopped for a moment, watching her in silence. There was a calmness about Amelia, an ease with herself that Evelyn envied. Amelia seemed to live so freely, without the weight of responsibility or the burden of expectation that Evelyn carried every day. In contrast, Evelyn's life had always been dictated by deadlines, meetings, and expectations. She had built herself into the image of a powerful woman who could take on anything and anyone, but in that quiet moment, she realized how much she had sacrificed for that power. Evelyn stood there for several minutes, unsure of what to do. She had always been able to compartmentalize her emotions, push them aside when they got in the way of her work. But now, with Amelia in her life, things felt different. The professional and personal lines had blurred in ways she hadn't anticipated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Evelyn gathered the courage to step forward. She approached Amelia's desk, her footsteps soft against the carpet. Amelia looked up, her eyes bright as she noticed Evelyn standing there. "Hey," Amelia said with a smile, clearly surprised but pleased to see her. "I didn't expect you to still be here. Is everything okay?" Evelyn smiled back, though it felt a little strained. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, gesturing to the empty office around them. "Still working hard, I see." Amelia chuckled lightly. "It's a habit. I get so caught up in it sometimes that I forget the time." Evelyn nodded, but the words she wanted to say were stuck in her throat. She had come here to talk, to confront the feelings she had been avoiding for so long, but now that she was standing in front of Amelia, she wasn't sure how to begin. Her thoughts were all over the place, emotions clashing with her usual logical, controlled mindset. Amelia seemed to sense the hesitation in her. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes softening as she regarded Evelyn with quiet understanding. "You're not just here for a casual chat, are you?" she asked, her voice gentle. Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. She had tried to keep her emotions in check, but now, with Amelia looking at her with that kind and unwavering gaze, the dam she had carefully constructed began to crack. "No," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you about something. Something that's been on my mind." Amelia's expression remained calm, but Evelyn could see the curiosity in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, her tone open, her posture relaxed. Evelyn took a deep breath, trying to steady the rush of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "I don't know how to explain this," she started, her voice trembling slightly. "But being around you, it's changed something in me. I've been avoiding it for weeks, telling myself that it's just a distraction, that it's not important. But the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you." Amelia didn't speak at first, allowing Evelyn's words to settle between them. There was no judgment in her gaze, just a quiet understanding that seemed to make the space between them feel safe. Evelyn wasn't sure why, but she felt as if she could trust Amelia with her rawest truths. She had never let anyone see this side of her before, not even her closest friends, let alone someone she had only recently met. "I think about you all the time," Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "When I'm at work, when I'm in meetings, when I'm alone in my office, all I can think about is you. I don't know what this is, what we have, but I can't ignore it anymore." Amelia's eyes softened, her expression unreadable for a moment. Evelyn felt a knot form in her stomach, unsure of what Amelia was thinking, unsure of whether she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But then, to Evelyn's surprise, Amelia stood up slowly and walked over to her. She stopped just a few feet away, looking into Evelyn's eyes with a quiet intensity that seemed to disarm her completely. "Evelyn," Amelia said softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "You're not the only one who's been feeling this. I've been feeling it too. Ever since we first started talking, there's been this connection between us that I can't explain. It's not just a passing thing. It's real." Evelyn's heart skipped a beat at the words. She had expected hesitation, maybe even rejection, but Amelia's words were the opposite of what she had feared. They were a balm to the uncertainty that had been eating at her for so long. "Amelia," Evelyn whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what this means. I don't know how to do this. My life is so complicated. My work, my responsibilities, everything is tied up in this company. I've built my whole identity around it. How can I just throw it all away?" Amelia reached out, her hand gently resting on Evelyn's arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to throw anything away," she said softly. "You don't have to give up everything you've worked for. But you also don't have to ignore what's in your heart. You can have both, Evelyn. You don't have to choose between the person you are and the person you're becoming." For a moment, Evelyn simply stood there, staring at Amelia as the words sank in. The weight in her chest seemed to lighten, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a sense of clarity. Maybe she didn't have to choose between her career and her heart. Maybe there was a way to build a life that allowed her to embrace both, the ambition and the love, the strength and the vulnerability. Evelyn nodded slowly, a tear escaping down her cheek. She hadn't allowed herself to cry in years, but now, in the presence of someone who saw her for who she truly was, the dam had finally broken. "I don't know what the future holds," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "But I want to find out. I want to see where this goes." Amelia smiled softly, her thumb brushing gently across Evelyn's cheek to wipe away the tear. "We'll figure it out, together," she said, her voice filled with quiet certainty. In that moment, Evelyn knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The future was uncertain, and the path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to take the next step. And whatever came next, she would face it with Amelia by her side. The days after their conversation seemed to unfold with a new sense of possibility, though that sense was still tinged with uncertainty. Evelyn couldn't stop thinking about the promise she had made, to allow herself to embrace what was happening between her and Amelia Quinn. It wasn't easy. Every time she walked into the office, every time she sat at her desk, the pressure of her responsibilities pressed down on her harder. She had spent so many years constructing this life, this career, that now, as she teetered on the edge of something entirely new, the weight of it all felt almost unbearable. But with every glance at Amelia, every smile they exchanged, she felt a flicker of something that pulled her forward, away from the safety of the life she had built. The shift between them was palpable. The professional boundaries they had once maintained now felt more like a delicate balance. There were moments when they found themselves alone in the break room, their conversations light at first, but always laced with an undercurrent of something deeper. They both knew it was there, the connection that neither could deny, but the world around them had a way of reminding them of the risks they were taking. Evelyn felt that pressure acutely, knowing that their relationship, whatever it was, could have consequences far beyond the office. She had fought too hard for everything she had, and the idea of losing it all for something as unpredictable as love made her heart ache with a kind of fear she had never experienced before. But it was on a late Tuesday evening, as Evelyn sat at her desk reviewing a presentation, that things changed. The office was quieter than usual, the hum of the fluorescent lights above a constant backdrop to the stillness that seemed to wrap around her. It was moments like these that Evelyn appreciated, the brief respite when the chaos of the day settled into a calm, allowing her mind to wander. She was trying to focus, trying to finish the last of her work before the night ended, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Amelia. There was something about the way Amelia moved through the office, her effortless grace and quiet confidence that made Evelyn's pulse quicken every time their eyes met. Despite all the reasons she had to resist, to keep her distance, there was an undeniable pull toward Amelia that Evelyn could not escape. Just as she was about to wrap up her work for the night, Evelyn felt a familiar presence beside her. She looked up to find Amelia standing there, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I didn't expect to see you still here," Amelia said, her voice light but with an undertone that Evelyn couldn't quite decipher. "I could say the same about you," Evelyn replied, her tone half amused, half nervous. It wasn't that she didn't want to be around Amelia, far from it, but there was still something unsettling about their proximity, the constant awareness of the line between them. Amelia lingered for a moment, her eyes flicking down to the papers on Evelyn's desk before returning to her face. "I was thinking," she began slowly, "about what we talked about the other day. About what we're doing, where this is going." Evelyn felt a pang in her chest, a mix of dread and anticipation. She had been avoiding this conversation, hoping that the uncertainty would work itself out on its own. But she knew deep down that it couldn't last. They couldn't just keep dancing around the truth. "I know," Evelyn said quietly, her hands resting on the desk in front of her. "It's been on my mind too." She took a deep breath. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to balance us with everything else in my life. My work, the company, everything I've spent years building. It's hard to let go of control." Amelia nodded, her expression softening. She stepped closer to Evelyn's desk, her voice gentle. "I understand. You've built something incredible, and I don't want to take that away from you. I'm not asking you to give up your career or your dreams. But I don't think you have to choose between what you've worked for and what you want with me." Evelyn met Amelia's gaze, searching her face for any sign of uncertainty. But all she saw was sincerity, sincere hope, and something deeper she couldn't yet name. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Scared of what it means, scared of what it could cost. I've spent so long convincing myself that I couldn't have both. That I couldn't let myself feel anything personal, anything that wasn't about the company. And now, with you, I feel like I'm falling. I don't know if I can do it, if I can trust this." Amelia reached across the desk, her fingers brushing lightly against Evelyn's hand. The simple gesture sent a wave of warmth through Evelyn's body, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Amelia said, her voice steady and calm. "We're both figuring this out, and we don't have to rush. I just want you to know that I'm here, no matter what. Whatever you need, we can take it one step at a time." Evelyn's heart ached at Amelia's words. How had she managed to make everything seem so simple? In a way, it made Evelyn's fears feel smaller, more manageable. She wasn't sure if it was the reassurance in Amelia's voice or the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her, but Evelyn felt herself letting go, even if only a little. "I don't know what will happen next," Evelyn whispered, her eyes dropping to their intertwined hands. But I want to try. I want to see where this goes. With you. Amelia's smile grew wider, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of relief and tenderness. We don't have to know everything right now. We can take it slow, figure it out together. Evelyn let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For the first time in a long time, the weight of her fears began to lift, replaced by something else, something lighter, more hopeful. In that moment, Evelyn realized that the fear she had been carrying all this time wasn't because of what was to come, but because of what she had been denying. She had been so focused on the idea of losing control, on the risks and consequences of opening herself up, that she hadn't allowed herself to see the possibility that came with it. She hadn't allowed herself to believe that there could be room for both, the work that she loved and the love that she was beginning to feel for Amelia. Evelyn stood up slowly, her fingers still brushing against Amelia's. She didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to know how everything would work out. All she needed to do was trust herself, trust Amelia, and trust the path they were on, even if it was uncertain. I don't know how this will work, Evelyn said, her voice stronger now, more confident. But I want to find out. With you. Amelia's face lit up with that same warm, reassuring smile that had become so familiar to Evelyn. We'll figure it out together. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Evelyn didn't feel alone. For the first time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground, ready to face whatever came next with someone by her side. She didn't have all the answers, but that was okay. Maybe, for the first time, she didn't need them. All she had to do was take the next step, and Amelia would be there, beside her, every step of the way. As they stood there in the quiet of the office, a new sense of possibility filled the air, and Evelyn knew that this was just the beginning. The future, with all its uncertainties, suddenly seemed a little less daunting. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. The weeks that followed their quiet moment of understanding seemed to shift the atmosphere between Evelyn and Amelia. There was an unspoken agreement between them now, a pact of sorts to let things unfold naturally. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn didn't feel the need to control every aspect of her life. She found herself drawn to Amelia in ways she hadn't anticipated, her feelings growing deeper with each passing day. The small moments they shared, whether it was a casual conversation in the hallway or a lingering touch that spoke volumes more than words ever could, made Evelyn feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years: peace. But despite this new sense of connection, the reality of their situation hung heavily over them. Evelyn had spent most of her adult life building Lynch and Ashcroft Technologies, and the company was more than just a job, it was her life's work, her identity. The stakes were high, and she had spent countless hours ensuring that everything ran smoothly. To let someone else in, especially someone like Amelia, felt like a risk that Evelyn wasn't sure she was ready to take. Amelia, on the other hand, was an anchor in the storm of Evelyn's mind. Her presence brought an ease that Evelyn hadn't known she needed. There was something about Amelia's unpretentious warmth, the way she had always seemed to balance work and life with such grace, that grounded Evelyn in a way no one else ever had. Yet, as the days passed, Evelyn couldn't ignore the quiet voices in the back of her mind, whispers of doubt, of fear that this connection would complicate everything. Their professional roles still existed, and while they had agreed to take things slow, there was a constant tension, a pull between the personal and the professional. They had to navigate their feelings without letting them disrupt the delicate balance of the office. Every time Evelyn found herself looking at Amelia, the worry would creep in. Could she truly manage a relationship with someone so close to her in the workplace? Would their connection cause her to lose sight of everything she had worked for? But as much as she tried to suppress it, the tension between them only seemed to grow. Every time they were alone, the air was thick with unsaid things. Every glance lingered a little too long, every touch felt heavier. Amelia was patient with her, giving her space when she needed it, but Evelyn could feel the walls she had put up slowly beginning to crumble. One evening, after a particularly draining day at the office, Evelyn found herself alone in the conference room, reviewing the numbers for the upcoming quarter. She had been at the office far longer than she intended, the weight of the day's tasks bearing down on her. The building had quieted down, the usual hum of activity now replaced by the distant sound of footsteps echoing down the hall. She was tired, physically and emotionally, and she could feel the exhaustion creeping into her bones. She needed a break, but there was too much to do. The door to the conference room creaked open, and Evelyn looked up to see Amelia standing in the doorway, her expression hesitant but warm. "Evelyn?" she asked softly, almost as if she was unsure whether it was a good time to interrupt. Evelyn smiled faintly, her gaze softening when she saw Amelia. "You're still here too?" she said, trying to mask the tiredness in her voice. She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Come in." Amelia stepped into the room, her footsteps light. She was holding a cup of coffee, the steam rising from it in the dim light of the conference room. "I thought you might need a break," she said, her voice carrying a hint of concern. "It's late. You've been at this for hours." Evelyn sighed, rubbing her temples. "I can't seem to turn off my brain," she admitted. "There's always something else to do, something else that needs my attention." Amelia set the coffee down on the table and sat across from Evelyn. "You're always so focused, Evelyn," she said quietly, her voice soft but with an edge of sadness. "I just want you to know that it's okay to slow down sometimes. You don't have to do everything alone." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Amelia's face, and she saw the sincerity in her expression. It made something twist in her chest, something that felt like guilt and longing all at once. She had spent so long building this world, so long convincing herself that she couldn't rely on anyone, that now, the thought of letting someone else in felt both like a relief and a threat. "You don't understand," Evelyn said, her voice a little sharper than she intended. "I can't slow down. Not when there's so much at stake." Amelia didn't flinch at Evelyn's words, her gaze steady. "I do understand," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet conviction. "I understand that you've worked hard for everything you have. But I also understand that you deserve to have someone by your side. You don't have to carry all of this on your own." Evelyn looked at her, feeling the walls inside her start to crumble even more. "I don't know how to do that," she said, her voice breaking with the weight of her confession. "I don't know how to let go." Amelia reached across the table, her hand hovering near Evelyn's before gently resting on top of hers. "You don't have to let go of everything, Evelyn. Just let me in. Let me help you carry the load. Let me be a part of your life, of your world, without trying to control everything." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to pull away, to retreat back into her world of control and independence, but the warmth of Amelia's touch made that impossible. It felt too good. Too right. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that if I let you in, if I let myself care too much, I'll lose everything. My career. My reputation. Everything I've worked for." Amelia squeezed her hand gently, her thumb brushing softly over Evelyn's knuckles. "You won't lose anything, Evelyn. Not if we do this together. You're not alone in this. You don't have to be." Evelyn's chest tightened, and for a moment, all she could do was stare at Amelia. She had never allowed herself to be this vulnerable, had never let someone else see the cracks in her carefully constructed armor. But here, in this quiet moment, it felt different. For the first time in a long time, Evelyn realized that maybe, just maybe, it was okay to trust someone else. It was okay to let Amelia in. It was okay to let go of the fear that had held her captive for so long. "I don't know how to do this," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to balance this, to make it work. But I want to try. With you." Amelia's smile was soft and understanding. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. We'll take it one step at a time. Together." For the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The fear that had once consumed her now seemed smaller, less significant. She didn't have to do everything alone. She didn't have to carry the burden of perfection. She could lean on Amelia. She could trust in something more than work, more than success. And so, in that quiet room, as the city outside continued to hum with life, Evelyn made a choice. She chose to trust. She chose to let go, just a little. And as the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders, she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The weeks following that quiet, transformative evening in the conference room were a mix of anticipation and challenge. Evelyn had made a decision that day, a decision to trust, to let Amelia in, and to allow herself to experience something she had long kept locked away. But as much as she wanted to embrace this new chapter, there was a constant undercurrent of anxiety that refused to leave her. Evelyn's life had always been defined by structure, by control, and by an unrelenting work ethic. She had built Lynch and Ashcroft Technologies into the powerhouse it was, and she was deeply proud of what she had accomplished. But as she spent more time with Amelia, as she allowed her heart to open just a little, Evelyn began to question whether she had been sacrificing too much in pursuit of success. Was her work her only purpose? Was she really living, or was she simply existing, her life consumed by deadlines and spreadsheets? It was a thought that lingered in the back of her mind every day, but she pushed it aside, telling herself that she couldn't afford to let it distract her. There was always something that needed her attention, some issue that had to be solved, some decision that had to be made. But every time she looked at Amelia, every time their eyes met across the office, there was a quiet reminder that life could be more than this, more than work, more than the constant grind. One late afternoon, as Evelyn sat in her office, staring out at the city skyline, she heard a soft knock at the door. It was a sound that, in the past, she would have ignored. But today, for reasons she couldn't explain, she found herself feeling a strange sense of relief. She looked up to find Amelia standing in the doorway, her face soft and open, a gentle smile on her lips. "Can I come in?" Amelia asked, her voice as warm and inviting as always. Evelyn's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, she was unsure how to respond. The office was quiet, and the weight of the world seemed to settle on her shoulders in a way it hadn't before. But the way Amelia stood there, looking at her with that quiet understanding, made Evelyn feel like she didn't have to have all the answers. She could just be herself, in this moment, with no expectations. "Of course," Evelyn said, her voice unexpectedly soft. Amelia stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit down immediately, instead walking over to the window, where Evelyn had been standing just moments before. The evening light cast a warm glow over the city, and for a brief moment, it felt like the world outside had paused, just for them. "I was thinking," Amelia began, her voice careful, as if testing the waters, "about how we've been moving forward. About where we're headed." Evelyn's chest tightened slightly at the mention of the future. It was a subject that always made her uneasy, especially now. She had allowed herself to take a step forward, but the road ahead still felt unclear. "I know," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "It's complicated." Amelia turned to face her, her eyes soft but searching. "I know it's complicated," she said, her tone steady. "But I think we need to talk about what this really is. About what we want from each other. Because I don't want to keep moving forward without being honest with you." Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of Amelia's words settling over her like a blanket. She had been so focused on the uncertainty of their situation, so preoccupied with the fear of losing control, that she hadn't fully realized how much of herself she had already given. The walls she had so carefully constructed over the years had cracked, and now, as she stood in front of Amelia, she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She wanted this. She wanted them. "Amelia." Evelyn began, but her voice faltered. She hadn't anticipated the emotional flood that hit her in that moment. She had spent so long trying to protect herself from feeling too much, but now, with Amelia standing before her, all her fears, all her doubts seemed so small. "I'm scared," Evelyn admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm scared of losing everything. My career, my reputation. I've worked so hard to get to where I am, and sometimes it feels like everything could fall apart if I let go even a little. Amelia stepped closer, her expression unwavering, and placed a hand gently on Evelyn's arm. I don't want you to lose anything, Evelyn. I don't want to take anything from you. I just want you to know that I'm here. No matter what happens. You don't have to do this alone. Evelyn's heart ached at the simplicity of Amelia's words. The tenderness in her voice, the sincerity in her gaze, it all pierced straight through the walls Evelyn had so carefully built. For the first time, Evelyn felt like she didn't have to choose between her career and her heart. She could have both. It wasn't going to be easy, but maybe it didn't have to be so impossible after all. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and hope. But I want to try. I want to build something with you, something real. I want to be with you, Amelia. The words felt like a confession, a release of everything Evelyn had been holding inside. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know how they would navigate the complexities of their relationship in the midst of everything else, but she knew one thing, she didn't want to face it alone. Amelia smiled softly, her hand still resting gently on Evelyn's arm. We'll figure it out, she said, her voice full of quiet confidence. Together. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Evelyn felt the weight of the world lift from her shoulders. The future was still uncertain, still full of unanswered questions, but for the first time, she didn't feel paralyzed by it. She felt free. Free to take the next step. Free to build something new, something beyond work, beyond ambition. As they stood there, the city lights twinkling outside, Evelyn realized that this was just the beginning. The path ahead would not always be easy, but with Amelia by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was ready to embrace it. They stood there for a while, in the quiet of the office, neither of them needing to say anything more. The words had been spoken, the connection had been made, and the future, whatever it might hold, felt full of possibility. And as the night stretched on, Evelyn allowed herself to believe, truly believe, that maybe everything she had worked for, the company, her career, the life she had built, wasn't the only thing worth living for. Maybe love, connection, and vulnerability were just as important. And with Amelia beside her, Evelyn was ready to see where that journey would take them. Together.